izazovi u dekarbonizaciji energetskog sektora. Dekarbonizacija energetike više nije pitanje izbora, nego je pitanje nužnosti i veliko nam je zadovoljstvo što će ovaj važni segment otvoriti gospodin Christopher Sheldon, šef ureda Svjetske banke za Bosnu i Hercegovinu i Crnu Goru. Izvolite.
Dobar dan. It's a pleasure to be here. Congratulations to the organizers for such an excellent event. So BAH has set very ambitious climate goals, and I think we all know that the challenge now is to really move from strategy to actual implementation, both at speed and at scale in the energy sector. And over the next few minutes, I'll outline some key bottlenecks that we see from the World Bank, and also a practical package of actions that can be used to really accelerate the scale of renewables and energy efficiency, protect vulnerable households, and keep also the economy competitive. So the focus is really on solutions that mobilize investment, strengthen the grids, and support a just transition so we can build an efficient and sustainable future together. So BAH has set some very ambitious climate change objectives in its strategic documents, but really now it needs to accelerate the implementation. So on the left, you see two simple bar charts that show BAH's stated greenhouse gas reduction targets below the 1990 baseline. The top chart, you can see that the 2021 NDC sets a 33% reduction by 2030 and 62% by 2050 versus that 1990 base level. And on the bottom chart, you can see the 2023 draft NECP raises the ambition to 41% cut by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. So these charts, they really tell a clear story. BAH has really stepped up in its climate change mitigation ambition. However, this net zero target isn't really yet reflected in the primary law, and it's okay? No? And on the ground, emissions have barely moved in the last 15 years. So the challenge is less about setting the goals and more about the implementation, with really translating these goals into bankable projects and measuring the emission deadlines. So the energy sector decarbonisation is really hindered by several challenges. Firstly, it's constrained by structural and technical issues, economic, financial constraints, regulatory, market barriers, and just transition needs. And we're going to unpack those four challenges in the next slides. But before doing that, I really want to emphasize that BAH also faces a growing external and political and economic pressure to decarbonize its energy sector, especially from its main trading partner, the EU. And we heard that in the opening remarks this morning. A key example is the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM. And as an electricity exporter and a producer of a lot of carbon-intensive goods, BAH is just facing growing competitiveness risks as CBAM phases in. And unfortunately, without a domestic carbon pricing system, either a tax or emissions trading system, and recycling of revenues into transition measures, CBAM basically just becomes a cost to be paid to the EU rather than funds sort of retained domestically to support decarbonisation and transition. So let's look at each of those challenges. Firstly, the structural and technical challenges. So there's a legacy here. You can see on the left-hand side some of the legacy issues in the energy sector. It remains heavily coal-dependent. Many lignite units are more than 35 years old. Life extension in order to meet the EU large combustion plant standards is increasingly uneconomic, and new coal is commercially risky. Second, energy use is highly inefficient in BAH, and that's why the energy system in the in BAH remains among the most energy and carbon intensive in Europe, as you can see from the chart. I don't know, is this a pointer? No, okay. So the green dot there is BAH. You can see it's very energy intensive and has high emissions for the relative to the outputs in the economy. And on the right-hand side, renewable energy development also has some technical constraints. Hydro is a key low-carbon energy source, but often the strategic sites are transboundary, requiring a lot of regional agreements. Environmental and biodiversity concerns are also significant. And grid readiness is another bottleneck. Limited capacity in remote, high-resource areas, slow smart grid deployment, and insufficient regional integration sort of complicates variable renewable energy integration and increasing the balancing needs. So as a result, the penetration of solar and wind in the generation mix is very small, still only around 7% in 2024. And even when projects are technically viable, financing and affordability constraints can also stall them. So let's look at the economics. On the left box, you can see that BAH carries significant losses and arrears related to the coal mining activities. At the same time, household electricity tariffs are artificially low, are actually among the lowest in Europe in terms of purchasing power parity. If you look at the slide, the lightest colours there are the lowest cost, and BAH is one of the lowest cost in the region. And all of this sort of weakens the sector's finances and discourages energy efficiency and renewable energy investments. In the middle box, on the demand side, households face affordability limits, constrained with access to credit, low awareness, high transaction costs that limit the uptake of energy efficiency and clean energy investments. So energy poverty still remains a widespread issue. And on the right box, investment needs are multi-billion through 2050. For renewable energy capacity storage, grid modernization, and mine closure land repurposing, the World Bank's own studies showed that you need almost $6 billion to achieve that by 2050. On the regulatory side, you can see the bankability of renewable energy projects is impacted by governance, market, and also permitting issues. The private sector investment, that requires clarity. So let's look at the market issues that affect the bankability. Fragmented multi-level governance and slow alignment with the energy community and EU rules really impede a coherent system of reform and market development. At the same time, the power market is underdeveloped. I know there's some efforts in this regard, but there's limited wholesale liquidity and a lack of a functioning power exchange, and that really constrains price discovery, hedging, and bankability for merchant or partially contracted renewable energy. The frameworks for power system flexibility, both storage, demand response, and ancillary services, they're very nascent, making it hard to finance system balancing assets, which are really needed to sustainably scale up the variable renewable energy. And developers also face lengthy, complex, costly permitting, unclear land rights, and uncertain spatial planning, which raises the risk premium and delays the delivery. So all of this needs to be managed to improve the bankability of renewable energy projects and really unlock the private investment. On the just transition issues, achieving a just transition, and we've heard this morning, really requires carefully addressing the socioeconomic and environmental aspects of decarbonisation. But let's also discuss that human and social dimension of the energy transition. Coal phase-out in BAH threatens roughly 16,000 to 17,000 direct and indirect jobs, concentrated in municipalities where coal is often so integrated into the economy that it can be between 25 or even 60% of local employment. And that makes coal phase-out a major risk to the livelihood of the entire communities across the country. Mine closure and land repurposing, it's a complex process. Responsibilities for that get split between the government, the state-owned enterprises, and this complicates planning and slow remediation that could really anchor new investment and jobs. And households already spend a higher budget share on energy than the EU average, around 10% compared to 6% across the EU. So energy efficiency renovations and electricity tariff reforms must also be paired with really targeted support to protect the most vulnerable households. So how do we accelerate this transition? What can BAH do to overcome these challenges and really accelerate the decarbonisation of the energy sector? So we have 5 key recommendations. Firstly, reform pricing and sector finance. So gradually move to a cost-reflective tariff with targeted social protection to the people that really need it. Reduce cross-subsidies and implement utility financial recovery plans. Ring-fence funding for renewable energy, grid and just transition, and improve creditworthiness and crowding in private capital. Secondly, accelerate enabling market reforms, power exchange, modern market rules, streamlining the permitting with time-bound standards and one-stop shops, clarify land and grid processes, standardise bankable PPAs, auctions, introduce carbon pricing that's aligned with the energy community and EU trajectories. Thirdly, invest in the grid and flexibility. Prioritise transmission to high resource zones, smart grids, regional interconnections, and enable ancillary services with proper remuneration, establishing a framework for storage and demand response. Fourth, scale up demand side action in buildings and heating. So subsidies, credit lines with technical assistance with city level programs, build ESCO markets, simplify household finance, especially for low income and multi-family buildings. And fifthly, expand the just transition programs. Fund severance and arrears, resolution if it's needed, retrain people, the job placement, small and medium enterprise support, community infrastructure, accelerating reclamation, repurposing of post-mining lands to host clean energy industrial projects. And I'm pleased to say that this is something that we are working on, and the government here in the Federation is pioneering that work. But it would, if you can do all of this is the last slide, it would allow BAH to reap substantial economic, environmental and social benefits over the next decades. All the actions that I just described, they're all demanding, they're all challenging, but the upside is substantial. The payoff is significant. Stronger energy security, better air quality and health, new jobs and investment, upgraded infrastructure, and improved social resilience. So with coordinated efforts and really targeted support, BAH can capture value at home and also position itself competitively in the green economy. Thank you.